22% of Americans in rural areas and 27% of Americans in tribal lands lack the coverage from fixed broadband as compared to only 1.5% of Americans in urban areas.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of rural folks just don't have the option to get fiber to their house. And so, relying on these satellite systems has been kind of a game changer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Farm Files episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere. I'm one of your co-hosts for this farmer and rancher-driven podcast, Sarah McNaughton-Peterson, and I'm here with Curt Arns.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we're powered by John Deere, so for all of your equipment and technology needs, see your local Deere dealer.
Absolutely. And so, Curt, we've got kind of a cool story we're going to talk about here today. And before we get into it, I'd like to preface, we came up with this idea, end of 2024, even like last summer in 2024. So we had no idea about this before the election and incoming administration. And so when we're diving into this topic, Curt, we're just going to throw out here again, we have no political affiliation on either side of the aisle here at FP Next. We're just here to chat a little bit about Elon Musk and what kind of involvement he's had with the agriculture industry before anything that's currently happening in the administration has happened. So with that out of the way, Curt, tell us a little bit about who Elon Musk is.
Yeah, so we just have a few facts that some of our listeners may know or may not know, but Elon was born in South Africa in 1971, immigrated to Canada in 1989, and graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. He moved to California, and when he was quite young, so 1995, he co-founded the company Zip2. But the companies that we really hear a lot about are SpaceX, which he's CEO, chief engineer for SpaceX. And, they just made a big splash a couple of weeks ago, bringing the astronauts home from the International Space Station, which was a huge deal. That came about in 2002. The other one that a lot of our farmer listeners probably know about is Starlink, extremely involved in that. And that is really a great internet option for a lot of rural folks who just don't have a lot of internet options. So that's been pretty popular. And of course, Tesla, right? So we see a few Tesla trucks running around. I think you probably have some in North Dakota. I see a few up and down the road here too. So that's you can always tell them. They're very distinct in driving down the road. You know the shape right away.
I never want to hate on anybody because I think one of the great things about where we live is everybody can get the choice to do whatever they want, live their life however they want. But if I see one more ugly Cybertruck on the road, it just kills me. Every time I see them, I'm like, that is the least aerodynamic thing I've ever seen in my life. It looks like kind of like a meteorite on wheels. And so that'll be my only bit of negativity that I'm sharing my personal opinion on is the Cybertrucks are ugly. And I every time I see them, I think there's a couple running around Bismarck. I think there's probably more. And I understand that they're popular. I just don't know why. So, but we're going to chat a little about some of those things. And I know one thing that I found out that was super interesting, Curt, in our research is Elon Musk actually created the payment model for PayPal. And like, how often have we all used PayPal?
Yeah, so everybody uses PayPal now, and it's sort of now there's some pretenders or I guess imitators, out there. But gosh, that was kind of one of the first ones that we knew about as that type of a payment system. And for someone who grew up writing checks, PayPal is a whole brave new world, right? But I think the younger generations probably don't know anything else other than PayPal and some of the others that are out there.
It's all about PayPal and Venmo, and it just makes life so easy. Especially, I'm a bad example, though, because I never carry cash and I never carry a checkbook. And so if I'm ever in a situation where, like, the card reader's not working, I'm usually just out of luck. So I should probably adjust that a little bit. But no, he had developed that online payment system with PayPal. And then when eBay purchased PayPal in 2002 for $1.5 billion, he received $160 million after taxes for his stake in the company. And this is the point where I'm wondering why I am also not a computer genius who's able to come up with these types of things, right, Curt?
Well, no risk, no reward. And I'm sure there's a lot of risks in being involved in the technological companies and enterprises, and he probably had a few that failed, but he certainly has bet on the right horse many, many times. The other kind of interesting company that he's very involved in, he purchased Twitter, and I still have a hard time. Are we still calling them tweets, or are they X? I don't know what to even call them at now that the company is X. But anyway, beyond that, that is kind of the social platform that a lot of the farmers you and I follow prefer. And I don't know if it's just because it's so easy to post on X, if you're sitting in the tractor cab and share your planting dates or what's going on out in the field. But farmers are on X big time, and they were on Twitter, but have certainly carried over to the X platform for sure.
Yeah, I mean, calling them X's never really works for me. I'm a big fan of Twitter or X, and I usually just end up saying Twitter and X/X because I think a lot of people notice two different ways. But I love the ag side of Twitter. I think there's so much good conversation, and there's always a lot of debates and people sharing like about their practices or their opinions or what's going on in their life or issues they're having. And I think the great thing about it is it's just a very informal platform for everybody to just kind of share their thoughts. And I mean, even like when you were at Commodity Classic, Curt, I don't know if you noticed, but they always have an ag Twitter meetup at some of those big conferences. And so all of the favorite people you might follow, I know I have a few I follow that I really enjoy, all get together and just hang out and chat in person after all that online communication. So I think it's a great platform that have brought a lot of people together. And I mean, I can't think of a platform that has more farmers and ranchers on it than Twitter or X does.
Yeah, I think a lot of farmers, when they're out in the field, that's kind of part of their daily routine is, I'm going to post this on X, and it kind of helps with the isolation during certain busy seasons where you just don't get to talk to people. But farmers like to share what's going on, and you can snap a quick picture out in the field and share what's going on, and then the next your neighbor might be doing the same thing. The other thing about X is I think it's kind of multi-generational. I know a lot of farmers who have been at it for a really long time over the decades, and they like posting on X, but the young folks out in the farm do as well, and a lot of farm spouses too like X. And so for some reason that is kind of a platform that we're able to connect as farm media. We're able to connect to a lot of farmers as well and kind of take a pulse of what's going on out in the field during the growing season especially.
So one of those ways farmers, of course, can stay connected on X and other platforms, and even when their equipment is Starlink. And I think a lot of us have heard of Starlink, but I know I didn't know before we were doing a lot of this research and like we had brought up the initial idea that Starlink is actually a part of Elon's company SpaceX that he founded in 2002. And honestly, when I'm looking on their website, Curt, they've got some pretty affordable plans. And I think a lot of things like this are really bringing a lot of connectivity to farmers and producers, depending on the area. Of course, everything depends on the area. I know, bless my parents' farmer neighbor, they put up a satellite tower in their backyard to make sure they could get good internet on their farm. And my parents have enjoyed the benefits of that since they can't get fiber or anything in their location. But I mean, how often do we even talk about the rural internet, Curt, and all the issues that we have?
Well, with all of us working remotely from our home offices in rural broadband, because most of us live in rural areas, and even sometimes in urban areas, there's a lot of issues with the internet. But out where I'm at, it's just constantly a problem. And as we need to do more over the internet, having good high quality internet, rural broadband is just it's just a must anymore to do business out here, and farmers rely on it so darn much. And I think Starlink has been one of the only solutions for a lot of folks. They've tried certainly other companies, and every company kind of has their thing. I see that Starlink has been kind of criticized for being a little more expensive than some others, but at the same time, for many, it's probably one of the very few options they have for high quality internet out in rural areas. And like whenever there is a natural disaster, which happens all the time, I think Starlink has really been a game changer for recovery efforts in a lot of these areas where they need internet access and just can't really get it in any other way after a disaster. And we've seen that kind of play out over the last years, where Starlink has been really a savior in some ways. It's certainly not the only option. There's lots of options out there, but in some areas, it is one of the very few options that is halfway affordable for people to, take advantage of. So if we're fighting on rural broadband, to try and increase our quality of that, which a lot of us and a lot of our listeners certainly are, that is definitely a big deal. And Elon's involvement in it has been, kind of a game changer out here to stay connected to the world, which we really need to do.
Absolutely. I know like the USDA says that, of course, high speed internet is vital to a bunch of different industries, not just agriculture, manufacturing, mining, forestry, a lot of things that can happen in rural communities for rural prosperity. But 22% of Americans in rural areas and 27% of Americans in tribal lands lack the coverage from fixed broadband as compared to only 1.5% of Americans in urban areas. And that was according to a recent report by the Federal Communications Commission. And so, I mean, if Starlink works for you, or if any internet works for you, I know Curt, you've been talking about getting some new internet going on. Not to share all of your stuff on there, but we're excited to do more video episodes when you get your rural internet connected. But I mean, the Starlink plans aren't too much more than the fiber internet I have, even living in the town of Bismarck. And so, I think any way people can stay connected, especially like you mentioned in those times of disaster, and you can get that increased productivity. It fosters economic development, job growth, entrepreneurship, innovative technologies. Like everyone's got to be connected to the internet. I know, Curt, even in my office here, I've got one of those smart air scent things, and it wants to connect to my internet so I can change the levels of scents that are dispensed. And I think so much stuff connects to the internet anymore. It's really imperative that it's there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of rural folks just don't have the option to get fiber to their house, and so relying on these satellite systems has been kind of a game changer, as I said before. But the other thing is, the more broadband width that we can get out here in rural areas, the more we can do. And just like you say, these all these little gadgets that want to connect, to the internet, it's a little crazy. And I think probably the more quality we get, then the more we're going to use that quality of the internet and use it for different ways, bigger files on the internet, more things that we can do, faster speeds. But as far as recording video podcasts, it certainly would help because with my system, I think with the first one we did, it took several hours to actually upload the video podcast, and that's why we don't do more of them, folks. So if I get things fixed up, maybe we can do a few more video podcasts. Not that you really want to see us necessarily, but it just is another way that we can record and get out to our listeners, I guess.
We do like to do those video podcasts. We have a lot of fun having some special guests show us some cool stuff. But besides SpaceX, the USDA has been investing in rural broadband for decades with hundreds of millions of dollars going to rural connectivity programs, from loans and grants to support modern broadband connectivity in rural communities. And of course, in 2018, the USDA introduced that Reconnect program, which is invested over $1 billion to expand high-speed broadband infrastructure in underserved rural areas and tribal lands. And I will also say, I don't know if you've noticed, if you ever head to a reservation, I know we do a lot of the Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara rodeo circuit, and there is never a phone signal to be had in a lot of those places. And so it must be really hard for those individuals that live there, work there, to do anything online. And so I'm glad that the USDA and some of these options are bringing opportunity like that to some of these rural areas and tribal lands.
Well, I think the connectivity thing is also attached to economic development. So if we want our small communities to be able to grow, business and create jobs and create opportunities for farm families and farm spouses close to home, and education too. How about our high schools, our rural high schools, and, being able to offer online courses that are college credit, that kind of thing. These are all really big issues that rely directly on connectivity. I mean, you've got to have a decent internet, and it's got to be high quality. And I think some of the COVID funds were supposed to be directed in that way when that, legislation passed. And so finally now I think a lot of these issues are being tackled. But gee, it's just taken so long. And I understand, our populations are less out in the rural areas, so I get it. But it really has taken a long time to get something that now we kind of take for granted. It's kind of like any other service that is sort of mandatory. We have to have good internet. The other thing that we really haven't talked about yet, and it's kind of the elephant in the room, and that is the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon has been so involved in. And without being on any side of the political aisle, this is not like a new idea. I mean, if you look at history, presidents going back, gosh, all the way back, but probably in my most recent memory, going back to George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, President Obama, we've had certainly presidents who have tried to increase efficiency, and sometimes the obstacle has been those in Congress. Sometimes it's been the administration. It's both parties, all parties involved, but certainly the effort to be more efficient is nothing new. We can argue a lot about how that, comes down and how it really impacts people and where those cuts are made. But I think the idea is really nothing new. And Elon is kind of the face of that right now. But it is sort of an interesting turn that we had no idea about when we first started talking about having a discussion about his involvement in agriculture.
Absolutely. I know, like, even we were discussing before we started recording today that he's a senior advisor. He's not on a cabinet, he's not a cabinet member. And so he has no actual authority to make any of these decisions. And I know some of them, like we've discussed, some of them could be good, some of them might be a little bad for farmers. But like you mentioned, it's just one of those things that every administration does, is trying to cut costs. And I think it really depends on the operation. But was it Ronald Reagan who said the scariest thing in the US language is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help? And so I think that could be kind of our little wrap up on the Doge discussion there. But one other thing I want to touch on the Starlink side, because I think the rural connectivity is just so important, is that Starlink has more satellites in space than any other company, and even more than all the other satellites in space combined, which he has 7,000. It brings internet speeds that are faster than its competitors, and it's built a significant market share. And of course, like, once you've got the service and it's up and running, you're paying for it every month, and then it's unlikely people are ever going to turn it off once they get that connectivity. And so that's one of those things that I think is really interesting, is talking about what a company he has built to bring that rural connectivity to everybody in urban, rural, tribal, kind of just, it depends. I wonder, we should look up your address off recording and see if you're able to qualify for Starlink, and maybe we can hit some more of those video podcasts, right? So we can have some more cool guests on.
Well, I've already checked into that, and it's kind of an interesting process. It's not that hard to set up yourself. You have to order the equipment in our area anyway, and there are installers that charge a little bit of money to install it for you, but it's really not that difficult. And then the packages are, I mean, there again, it kind of depends on what you're used to. If you're moving from Chicago or a major metropolitan area out in the country, maybe you think it's expensive. But if you're in the rural area and your internet has not been very good over the years, then you're willing to pay probably a little bit more for something that is going to get you better quality. And I'm not, we're not advertising for Starlink. We're just saying that it's just an option, and it is. And Elon's been very involved in this, and it does provide a great service in places where that service maybe wasn't available in any other way, out in the country in these very remote areas where both of us live and work.
Absolutely. There's of course like HughesNet, Verizon has branched more into giving some of that home internet options. There's a lot of different companies. I know when we're talking about Elon Musk, that was kind of our pitch for this whole episode. Is we want to talk about rural broadband connectivity, and just talk about, even now, Curt, I know, like you've mentioned, when you used to drive the tractor, it didn't even have a cab on it. And now you're just like driving in a spaceship with some of these combines and tractors, you get the opportunity to ride along in. is everything is so reliant on that rural connectivity.
The other, talking about Musk, the other thing that's sort of interesting is have you seen some of the robot prototypes, that he's been working on, which are really a little freaky for my generation. It's just a little scary, honestly, but yet someone who really loves technology, pretty darn cool. Now, my surprise is that he hasn't gotten a flying car that's a Tesla yet, because the flying cars, I'm really interested in that. And I think that technology is going to be commercially available, for a very high price tag, but in the really near future. So it's back to the future stuff for me. And it kind of feels like that's something that, maybe he's not involved in now, but eventually might be, because it looks like it might be right up his alley. But golly, in my lifetime, I think about what life was like for just a normal farm family back in the 60s compared to today. And my neighbor uh, is 95, still lives out on the farm. And he started farming with horses, right, when he was a kid. And today, look at the technology that Musk and so many other innovators have come up with that has really changed agriculture. It's changed life for all of us in just that span of that 95 years. It's like, you know, it's like going to another planet almost. If you were, started in the early 1900s and now all of a sudden you're plopped into 2025, there have been a couple of changes for sure. It's really interesting. And as you get older, you kind of look back at that kind of stuff in a different way.
Absolutely. What I don't even remember what year the Jetsons came out, but I remember watching that a little bit and seeing like how futuristic they thought it was going to be with the flying cars and like the robot vacuums. And I think it's always fun to see like the retrospect of what technology was supposed to look like or presumed to look like. But also, I don't know if you've seen iRobot, but I have. So these humanoid robots that are made with Tesla, which is they're called Optimus, or known as the Tesla Bot, was announced the company's Artificial Intelligence Day in 2021. And Elon Musk describes Optimus as a general purpose robotic assistant designed to perform tasks that are dangerous, repetitive, and boring for humans. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of these things. They look exactly almost like the things out of iRobot, just without the faces. And so I'm always a little cautious when it comes to some of that new stuff. And I think we're going to have more and more conversations about this in the future as technology like this continues to develop.
Yeah, I wonder if one of those robots would clean chicken barns. That would be really a great thing if they would know how to run a tine scoop. That would help me out quite a bit.
Well, they can climb stairs and serve drinks, and so maybe you can get one of those set up eventually. I know I would like one to help clean horse stalls out in the spring because they sit in the stalls all winter and then it freezes and that leaves you a nice big old pile of mess, you know, in the springtime. So, but I think all in all, there's a lot of great technology and a lot of options coming for farmers and producers from all kinds of companies. Elon Musk is not the only one developing this technology, but he's kind of the game player when it comes to the real connectivity with Starlink. And so that's what we focus on a little bit today is because of that real connectivity opportunity.
Well, and it's kind of funny because I think folks who are not involved in agriculture um, often think of farmers in the old Green Acres way, the pitchfork and the bib overalls. And they don't realize that farmers are really some of the first adopters of technology. We take it for granted because we know that this is true, but there's a lot of folks away from ag, as I said, that just don't understand how really after the military, look at GPS, for instance, look at drones. After the military, farmers are some of the very first adopters of technology. So, Musk is one of the great tech innovators. No matter how you feel about him personally, you can't argue with the fact that he is a great tech innovator and how that does definitely, some of his applications definitely impact agriculture or will impact agriculture down the road in one way, shape, or form. So that's why, this conversation's kind of interesting, I think, especially from the ag standpoint.
Absolutely. And I know I even had a great conversation with one of my best friends, and she grew up on a farm. but they had beef cattle and her dad did row crops. And she was asking me about the dairy industry. And I was talking about the robotic collars that track the cow's movements, like those robots that push the feed up. Like there's so much technology and all kinds of facets of ag that people who don't see it every day or cover it every day like we do really don't even know how much technology is in all of these barns, in these combine sheds, in these fields. Like there is so much technology and so many cool things happening, especially like you talked about with the precision agriculture side. I know our local university here just passed a bill to fund more precision ag programs at our land grant university. And so I think it's something that's going to be growing, and we're going to be having a lot more discussions about the precision ag and technology and AI like as the years go on for sure.
Yeah, every year, every day, probably new applications are found for AI, for instance, in agriculture, for, precision technology. And I think, in the end, it's good for farmers because it helps us do a better job on the environmental side. You think about the old days when herbicide, insecticide, and fertilizer, really were, you just threw it out there and hoped it worked. It wasn't metered like it is now. And now, because of the cost primarily of a lot of these things that we use every day as a tool, um, we have to put it out with an eyedropper, and technology is the thing through especially precision tech that allows us to really get these things out in the field where they need to be. And like, we're such a huge irrigation state in Nebraska. So water management, what precision tech can do on a center pivot, for instance, to, with your variable rate and zone irrigation, you can get the water where it needs to be. You reduce runoff. You're not wasting water. And it just really helps us be more efficient out in the field, do a better job, raise more on the livestock and crop side with less inputs. And that has less of a carbon footprint. And it's good for everybody, good for the consumer, good for the farmer. So, yeah, I mean, I'm old, so technology, I've seen, a lot of advancement and evolvement over the years of technology, and I just find it fascinating. It's just completely different than the days when I was farming full time, and that hasn't been that long ago, how much things have changed.
Absolutely. I know, Curt, everybody thinks that I'm a millennial and that I should be great at technology. And I mean, I still sometimes fight with a PowerPoint slide. And so I think it's a lot of these farmers deserve a lot of credit for coming up with a lot of these programs and things they can implement on the farm. I know the last thing we want to touch on today before we wrap up is, and I just saw this in person last summer, is John Deere's See and Spray, which I think is just the coolest thing ever. And so I'm sure a lot of people know about it, but if you don't, it turns your current sprayer into a precision sprayer that targets only the areas that need it. And so any kind of crop, when you're spraying it, you can cut that herbicide usage and reduce water use and crop stress. And it's just these cameras set up on a sprayer and they just scope out those weeds. I know even like drones now have that technology. And how cool is that to not have to spray an entire field for weed control and just those small areas? Because I know here in the Dakotas, we're always fighting against like kochia, water hemp. You guys have the Palmer amaranth down there. A lot of these weeds that you can hit early and really can just increase your productivity in the field. But I mean, with that, we can just kind of wrap up today's episode. I think it's been a really good discussion talking about connectivity and technology on the farm. And no matter anyone's thoughts on Elon Musk, kind of like you said, just a reminder, we are not politically involved in any way. We just think he does some cool stuff for ag, especially last summer before any of this other stuff came up when we were planning for our episodes for 2025.
Just you're talking about See and Spray, and I just want to remind our listeners that we do have some podcast material coming up from John Deere talking about how systems that are able to be retrofitted on your planter, on your sprayer. That's one of them, coming up, so that you can kind of do conversions on some current equipment through, the company, to upgrade some of your equipment. So that'll be coming up. That's a good segue into coming up, into one of our next episodes shortly. Secondly, the thing about See and Spray that kind of is crazy is how fast you can travel through the field, and it's still able to identify and spray these weeds. It's just ridiculous. And so how much that really saves farmers on inputs, that type of technology is, and they're not the only ones doing it, but it's certainly amazing. So I guess as we wrap up, to our listeners, we want to thank you again for tuning into this episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere, allowing us, as always, into your tractor cab, your truck, on your farm, in your shop, and in your fields. A special thank you goes out to our sales, digital, production, and marketing team members who put in a lot of work with us. And if you want to be sure not to miss any top stories, sign up for our Farm Progress Text Blasts, which bring the hot stories right to your inbox.
You can sign up for those text alerts by texting FARM, FARM, to 20505. Be sure to follow Farm Progress on social media to stay up to date with ag news and more, and check out the digital edition of your regional publication at farmprogress.com. Speaking of those digital editions, Curt, all of our publications are going to have a special May Women in the Field digital edition coming out soon, so be on the lookout for that. I'm sure we will talk about it in a few of our upcoming episodes, but like we already mentioned, stay tuned for our next Field View episode. We're sharing our roundup from spring show season at Commodity Classic and CattleCon, and Curt got to sit down with some special guests from John Deere to talk about retrofitting your equipment and some other cool topics.
Well, and the retrofitting thing is kind of a way to save money, to get, new efficiencies onto your older equipment. And so we had a really good discussion when I was at Commodity Classic in Denver a while back with some of the good folks at John Deere. So look forward to that discussion.
Remember, you can follow along with FP Next by listening and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube or Farm Progress online. And be sure to leave us a review if you enjoy the show.
Sarah, you always say 5 stars or nothing.
Absolutely. And remember, if it's agriculture, your friends at Farm Progress have you covered. Here's wishing you high yields and good weather. We'll see you next time.